Thank you very much for joining the Online Creativity and Culture Conference. On behalf of University for Life, let's welcome Derek Cheshire. Derek is a fellow of the RSA, a speaker, trainer, business creativity and innovation specialist. He's also a radio presenter and a visiting professor at the VIT University in Chennai in India. Derek has worked with organizations of all sizes in places such as the UK, Mexico, Iran, and India. And he is also the author of the business handbook, Creativity in Action.
Chaos, disorder, entropy, call it what you like. It always seems to be increasing. And in our lives and our businesses, in order to try and make sense of this, we put in place more and more structures, processes and procedures. But it doesn't seem to work. We always want to be able just to manage what we can measure. We can't cope or tolerate ambiguity and chaos. As many scientists know, entropy is always increasing, and I don't propose to try and change this. In fact, according to the laws of thermodynamics, it would actually be impossible. But I would like to talk about chaos, and chaos is what we feel as a result of this increase in disorder. It causes us the pain, it causes us the stress, and that is something we can actually deal with. So I'd like to do three things in this talk, and one of them is to show how we can cope with this chaos and ambiguity. I would also like to show how this will lead us towards the shape of the organisation of tomorrow, and also how this will lead us to more sustainable organisations in the future. But for the time being, I would like to suggest that this is all about perspective. It's where we look at things from. So if you imagine yourself inside an atom, you're sitting there and electrons are whizzing around like flies around a picnic. It all looks incredibly chaotic. And then we step up a level and we might see atoms like similar to what we saw in science experiments at school. We have models of atoms with billiard balls. It looks like order has been restored. So I'm a little like this. I'm suggesting that things do depend on how far away you are and where you're looking from. I'm sure most people watching will have been and either bought a house or a flat with other family members or a partner, and one person will see a wonderful, fantastic kitchen where they can be cooking in. Another one will see a man cave, a place where people can go and play snooker and they can put their big widescreen television, etc. Somebody else will see a lovely tranquil bedroom or bathroom that they can relax in. And all these are the same thing. We're all looking at the same thing, but from a different perspective. So this is the point of view that I'd like to start out from now. So what does all this mean for our businesses, our organisations, our families, or even just ourselves? Can we actually step away and reduce the chaos, but still keep all the detail that we really want? Well, let's see. There are many techniques that we can use to do this. Our creative toolboxes are full of them. We can use techniques for reframing and idea generation and looking from a different perspective, or even just doing things within our businesses we've always done, but in a slightly different or a slightly more effective way. So what does this mean for our businesses, our families, our organisations and ourselves? Can we actually still keep the detail whilst reducing the chaos and the stress in our lives? Well, I believe we can, and the answer is to use creative thinking, or as some people call them, alternative thinking techniques. There's lots of them. We can use them to reframe or to generate ideas or whatever. You just have to choose the right thing. But I think we can actually do it. But the problem is, what we tend to do is, when we tend not to understand things in an organisation, we introduce layers. And we keep on introducing layers with managers and various interfaces until the person at the top sees below them something that they think is completely ordered. The chaos is no longer there. The trouble is, it is. Think of yourself living in a house or a flat and you have a noisy neighbour playing very loud music, and you go to a friend's house a few streets away and you have a good evening and you come back. Unfortunately, the noise is still there. You haven't got rid of it. And this is the problem. The chaos is still there, and there is also a tendency for Chinese whispers to happen. So I don't know if people remember doing this. The send reinforcements, we're going to advance, gets passed along the line and turns out to send 3 and 4 pence, we're going to a dance. That sort of thing can happen. So things that you send up and down organisations get twisted and taken out of context. But more than that, the more and more layers we introduce, the more inflexible our organisations actually tend to be. They can't make decisions quickly, they can't react quickly. So what on earth can we do about this? Well, one of the things I'm suggesting is that we actually use patterns. So for instance, a football manager, you could think of a football manager as managing or directing 11 people on a football pitch. And depending on the game, it could be quite easy or it could be very complicated. But if you're managing using patterns, instead of managing 11 people, 11 players, think of yourself as maybe managing a football team. You might have other people working with you whose duty it is to manage individuals, but if you're concentrating on winning that game, then you manage a football team, not 11 individual players, and hopefully it saves your sanity somewhat. So, for increased flexibility, our organisations in the future are going to have fewer layers than they had. They may not be completely flat, but they will have many, many fewer layers. What will also happen is that positions in a hierarchy and names will no longer be attached to status. Your status will be independent of an organisation level or a title. In fact, our position, our status within an organisation is much more likely to depend on what we know and the things we're able to do. So the organisation will be something like, think of a bowl of soup with croutons in it. The soup will be the organisation and the culture, and we will all be floating around in it like croutons. We will all be on the same level. Managers will be there because things need managing, facilities need managing. There will need to be HR to look after employees and maybe some logistics and some planning. But things will be very, very different. Things will be much flatter. And to cope with this organisational culture, the messages that get sent around organisations will all have to be sent in a very, very different way. We will be, I use the soup analogy, but things will spread out like ripples on a pond, or in this case, ripples in soup. Things won't travel in straight lines. They won't travel up and down the silos that we've had previously. Things will be very, very different. The networks we will have in the future will be what I call soft networks. All this sort of sloshing around. We're going to be talking about action learning groups. We're going to be talking about coaching and all sorts of other things. We're not going to have hard networks. We're going to be using storytelling. And there is an interesting idea as well, because the cultures that depend on storytelling, Asian cultures, Eastern cultures, will be very, very much better than we are in the West at doing this. What does that mean? Well, there is a concept which I talk about called the human race, and I think of innovation as a race. Now, in the West, we have, first of all, we have all the kit. Because we've had lots of investment, we've probably had a head start. So think of it as we've got lots of athletes they've got all the right kit, we've got all the right lycra to wear, we've got all the right shoes, and we've been training on decent running tracks, we have all the facilities. Now if you think of maybe developing countries as not having had all that up until now, so you have athletes who are maybe running barefoot, they have shorts that flap around their legs, they have vests that are less than ideal, there's lots of air resistance, and they may have had poor training facilities, and they start behind us. But because these cultures have not done things that we have done, that they have not deleted creativity from their education system, because of the cultural things that they do, the storytelling, my suggestion is that they can run much faster than we can, even though they started off behind. So at some point in the future, the question is not are they going to catch up, but when are they going to catch up? But we don't know how long the race is going to be. But it poses a very, very interesting idea of people being able to work at a much, much faster pace, depending on the types of cultures that they've been used to. So what I call the soup model, croutons in soup. I'm not saying that every organisation has to go this way, but this is the sort of organic form that most organisations would tend to, given enough time and the way the circumstances are changing in the world. To satisfy the traditionalists who like to be able to manage what they can measure, we can set different key performance indicators for these sort of businesses. They will focus more on behaviours rather than on things like number of widgets produced per day or whatever. So those will be different. But the other thing we can do is something that I've been working on for a while, and I'll show you this now, which is what I call the innovation equation. It basically says that whatever your innovation output is, I mean, it could be shiny new things, it could be number of ideas, but whatever your innovation output is, I'm suggesting that it is dependent upon, or rather it's related directly to, a function of creativity, that is coming up with and combining ideas, and know-how. I don't like to use the term knowledge because people think knowledge management, very expensive computer systems, and you don't actually need them. So know-how, so that's the things we know. That's the things we have written down in our heads, the things we have access to. And then all that is raised to a power, and this is effectively the richness of our soup. It's the experience we've had putting all this into practice. It's the organisational culture and the things that go on, which means that we can talk to one another over the water cooler and the coffee machine without the boss breathing down our necks. So we can share ideas, we can combine ideas, we can come up with new ideas. So all of those things. And because we're raising that to a power, the more we do it, the greater the output is. Now this was something that I dreamt up one night as a model, sort of leapt up, shouted eureka, and there was it. But the findings have been, I say, loosely borne out by a colleague of mine who did some research as part of an MBA program. So all I'm suggesting is that this is a model, it seems to work, and the individual components can be measured using behaviour, by analysing behaviours, surveys, etc. And it tells us things like which parts of the organisation are more risk averse, where the management is being a bit too hands-on. It will tell us what people think of the way they work in teams, etc. You can do that according to department, according to geographical location. So it tells you where the quick wins are. It tells you where you need to maybe do some staff development, so you don't have to spend money across the whole organisation. It tells us an awful lot of useful things. And so the potential benefits are things like the organisation can redesign itself. It will automatically change and react according to its environment and its surroundings. We get some good HR benefits for free. And we can spend more time actually doing things than actually maintaining these very rigid, expensive, horrible hierarchies that we've had for a long, long time. We'd still have key performance indicators, and we can make much more or many more informed choices about how we spend our money on HR and staff development. Increased flexibility, increased efficiency, and the ability to much more easily generate new products and services. Now that is going to wow high-level sponsors and gatekeepers, isn't it? But what about the rest of the organisation? What about the people lower down? Now these people are going to be thinking, will I still have a job? How am I going to fit in? And they'll be worrying about that. But at this point, you should already have some sort of change agents out in your company, acting a little like the croutons in the soup. People who will be there already to help you. Now, employees may say that they don't communicate or they can't communicate all the things that you'd be liking them to do. But they will be talking to each other at the coffee machine, at the water cooler, during the lunch break, in the car park. In fact, in a whole host of places that you probably don't even know about. The thing is, all these interactions should be encouraged, and the line between work and non-work blurred. Social shouldn't mean out of work. Social should just mean talking to one another, and that should be encouraged all of the time. Now, I believe that everybody has a little creativity. What about the time, for instance, when you were small and you went out to play and your mother said to you, now be in by 8 o'clock tonight because you know you've got school tomorrow, and you didn't come in at 8 o'clock at night. In fact, you came in probably at 9 o'clock with some great excuse as to why that happened. I know it happened to me. In fact, I did it by winding my watch back an hour. But that is creativity at work. And then there's the man who's asked by his wife to fetch a bottle of wine or some food on the way home, and he forgets. But he comes up with an elaborate excuse as to why he didn't. That is creativity. That is storytelling. And then, of course, there's the man who forgets his wife's wedding anniversary. And that requires an awful lot of creativity. But I was reminded about this, about people thinking that they weren't creative, when I did some work in Mexico a few years ago. I did some work for a mattress manufacturer, and they took in all the raw materials, wire, foam, fabric, and made mattresses. And they decided that they wanted to run an innovation program. They didn't quite know why or what they expected from it, but they decided they wanted to run an innovation program. And as part of that, we ran some creativity workshops just to get people to think in creative ways and remove the sort of editors in their brain. Now, one guy said, I'm not creative. I don't think I'm creative. I work in IT and my boss is the finance director. So we explained that although that was his job function and he did have to do those things, it didn't stop him being social. It didn't stop him contributing ideas to whatever system they had for collecting them. Didn't stop them, or rather it didn't stop him spreading his knowledge. And he was quite enthused by this, and he contributed brilliantly through the rest of the workshop. He thoroughly enjoyed being a crouton in the soup. So our natural creativity can be amplified. We can use it more wisely. We can use it to create things, look at things in alternative ways. The techniques we use work for groups and organisations, individuals, and we can use them for generating ideas, exploring situations, changing perspectives and decision making. Now, our lives in general are becoming more chaotic, more stressful. There is pressure to change, but there's pressure to become even more successful. So we can learn to live with chaos and ambiguity by using patterns, and this will lead to flatter and more flexible organisations in the future. Organisations will work very, very differently to the way they do now. Decisions will be made more quickly, ideas will be shared more easily, and management will look very, very different. But organisations will also survive for longer by adapting to new challenges and the environments that exist around them without having to use external and often very expensive change agents. But as a side effect, we will have created, almost by accident, the ultimate innovation machine. We actually have the blueprint. We have the tools. So, what are we waiting for?
Okay, but I wanted to ask you a question arising from your theories about the value of chaos. And That's to do with creativity when it is seen to be disruptive. And for me, in my mind, chaos and disruption, it's like, you know, the image that I have, like you use those metaphors, the image I have of disruption is when you throw a pebble into the pond and, you know, there's ripples and you just don't know what the impact is going to be exactly. And so bearing that in mind, companies such as Uber, companies such as Airbnb, they've caused a lot of disruption around the world. And this disruption might be very good at the local level, but that disruption in countries that are far away from the core of these companies has been quite negative and very traumatic. In India, a lot of taxi drivers have committed suicide because they got themselves into a lot of debt, thinking that Uber was going to bring in a lot more investment than actually it did. And Airbnb in places like Barcelona, it's made it very difficult for the locals to rent properties because the landlords prefer to rent them out to tourists through Airbnb. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about disruption and chaos in that respect, that, you know, not at the local level, but when that disruption has an impact on the bystanders, as it were.
Of mixing metaphors. We got chaos and disruption and pebbles and ripples. So first of all, I think you have to separate we have to separate the chaos from the disruption. The disruption causes the chaos. So the big disruption in the beginning is actually Uber, I suppose, changing the rules. I'm not sure that actually so much caused chaos, but the problem there was, almost jumping to the ripple analogy, is yes, ripples were sent out as Uber changed the market. But what didn't happen was that the knowledge that goes with it. I'm talking about a flat organization, and for those sorts of things to work properly, knowledge has to flow. And what didn't happen, I suspect, is the knowledge of exactly what it would mean for the taxi drivers when they adopted the Uber way of working. And I know the very end of the question also dealt with the ethics of it. I suspect Uber disrupted the market, changed the market, and acted slightly unethically in doing what they did, because they probably knew full well the effect that it would actually have. Now, looking at it from the bottom, the taxi drivers didn't understand the effect. They just thought, "Oh, more work for me." So it's the imperfection in the knowledge, if you which is the problem there. Not the fact that there's chaos, because once Uber have disrupted the market in the same way Netflix sort of bumped Blockbuster Video out of the market, there wasn't really an awful lot of chaos once the disruption had actually occurred. So I think the problem there is the poor taxi drivers, the poor renters of apartments are just falling foul of the problem that they haven't got all the facts, if you like. I think that's the essence of it.
So yeah, so you know, looking at it from the point of view of a poor taxi driver in India, I don't have the full knowledge, because Uber is a company that was started in a foreign country far away from me, but they've just given me the marketing information, basically, which seems to
Yeah.
imply that I will have job security. And, some of these taxi drivers, perhaps they weren't even taxi drivers previously. They were just looking for a job. And
Mm.
Uber basically promised them a livelihood, a lucrative livelihood. So that the chaos through ignorance, is there a way of protecting people from that?
Um, Only in a way. It's only through education. It's a step on from where we often say, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. So if Uber comes to you and says, if you drive a car and you sign up with us, you'll have untold riches, and you'll own your car in a couple of years and all the rest of it, then people should really be looking into it. I can understand the draw of it, but I think it really is a case of buyer beware. That with that knowledge, they would have known how to deal with Uber and people in Barcelona dealing with Airbnb, possibly.
But people in Airbnb that story's different, isn't it? Because
It is different. They're not so much being ripped off, but the disruption really is the disruption in the market, which is Uber isn't actually that disruptive. And in fact, in developed countries, it gives taxi drivers a very flexible way of working, but they probably have more knowledge about the way Uber works. So I think the two examples of both are disruptive examples. One is disrupting the market and perturbing the market, and the other one is basically, I think, in some cases, being a little unethical by possibly withholding knowledge from the people that could work for them.
But even in the European countries, for example, I think there were strikes in France. The taxi drivers, the established taxi drivers, their livelihoods were being disrupted with this new company that was coming and undercutting their prices, basically. So it might have attracted new taxi drivers, but it caused the loss of earnings to those who were already established.
I think also Uber has had an effect in this country, in that what actually happened is that a lot of the regulations were being bypassed. A lot of the costs of the Uber drivers, certainly in this country, maybe in Europe, I don't know, were actually less, because they didn't have to conform to all the local licensing regulations. So there are many ways in which Uber drivers can undercut local taxi drivers, but I don't think it's not quite in the same way as in India, where people are almost being lured with a pot of gold, which is actually not, in many cases, not going to materialize.
Yes, absolutely. And so, thinking about the Barcelona case, how would education have helped in that respect? Because it's the local people who want to rent properties. Any amount of education isn't going to really help them, because they're not the decision makers in that case.
Well, the local people are there. The local people are the property owners, aren't they?
No, I meant the local people who want to rent a property.
Oh,
not the landlord.
Who actually want to rent the property rather than rent the property out.
Yeah, they're not.
There's absolutely, to be honest, there's absolutely nothing they can do in that situation. The only way you can do things is to try and change the market, which is effectively through legislation. It's very similar to the building of social housing in this country. You get the government to say to the councils or whoever, you're going to do it, in the same way they could actually say that only a certain percentage of properties can be rented out. A little like we do in the likes of Devon and Cornwall, where people aren't allowed to have they've limited the amount of holiday homes, so limited the amount of properties that can be rented out. That's the only sort of thing that you could do in that case. So the locals are stuck unless they can band together, I think, and actually affect some of the rules that govern the renting out of properties.
Okay, so how does chaos and ethics fit together for you then?
Well, depending how you look at it, they either fit or they don't fit. You could see them as separate things. Although when chaos reigns, it's a good time to take advantage of things, whether it's the market, whether it's people, whether it's resources. So I think, to be honest, they will, in the future, they will be firmly locked together, because if you go into the future with flatter organisations, say, and people are not, that they're not so hierarchical, people can move from company to company, then trust plays a big part. And if people aren't ethical or organisations aren't ethical, then people either won't want to do business with them or they won't want to employ people like that. So I think the ethics comes into it because of the need to be able to trust people and organisations, and without that, you're stuck, basically.
And sometimes companies like Uber, they may be ethical at the local level, but they're not ethical at the international level. So ethics is like within a context, isn't it? We have to think about, well, ethical for whom, is.
Yeah.
So do you think that with chaos, do organizations have to be limited in terms of the space that they occupy, or do you think that chaos can remain ethical even if it branches out unlimited?
I think it can remain ethical. It's just, I mean, if we go back to the croutons in the soup, if you like, if you assume that your bowl of soup is ethical, then using that metaphor, you could have an unethical crouton or no unethical croutons. The thing is, it's not saying that everything will be ethical, but I think an organic form of organisation that is based on trust, it'll be a bit like white blood cells attacking a disease. I think the unethical parts will tend to zero. I'm not sure they will ever be completely zero, but I think they will actually tend to zero. So, I think ethics is intertwined with chaos, and the more chaos there is, there's no reason for ethics to be ditched, to be ignored, or conversely, there's no excuse for, say, big companies, Uber, Google, to be unethical regarding their dealings with the people that they employ and the organisations they do business with.
Well, when you talk about organic things, everything organic has a life, it has this life cycle and then it dies. But organisations such as Apple, such as Microsoft, they're not willing to die. They're not willing to dismantle themselves.
I don't think the organic organisation has to die. I think it's, well, at least the way I talk about it, organisations are organic in that they can change themselves. They're not rigid and inflexible, so they can be here for a long time. Eventually, they may die, but if they're successful in changing themselves, then they will actually stay there. So that's what I mean by organic, in that they're changeable, a little bit, a bit chameleon-like. They can react to the marketplace. They can react to changes in the labour markets. They can react to all sorts of different things, a bit like a living organism can. The only thing is, the living organism usually has a fixed life, whereas an organisation could, in theory, live forever.
Well, the organisations that have lived the longest are those in Japan, where there have been companies that have survived for about 1400 years, but even those have not lasted. You know, there was a company recently, a temple building company, that failed due to this current recession, amongst all things, and that had survived for about 1400 years. And I don't know of an organisation, a company, a business that has survived more than 1400 years. Which in the span of things is not such a long time.
Well, yeah, who knows? Apple may still be here in 1400 years or 1500. We won't be here to see it. But in terms of many of the companies that exist in today's today's sort of marketplace, 10 or 20 years is often more than enough for some companies before they get bought or they fold completely. So the changing company is able to deal with the changes in the marketplace, and I don't know, global warming and politics and all the rest of it. But maybe some can go on forever. Maybe forever is just forever in business. In business terms, which could be 50 years or so.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Derek. That's been such an interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed exploring with you all these different facets of chaos and disruption. And let's see what the future has to bring in terms of organisations that become more disruptive.
Indeed. Let's hope we're here in 1400 years to see it.
Absolutely. Let's see. Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.